Chapter 4. At the last minute, Theo decided against sweet and sour shrimp, opting instead for crispy beef. It was one of Judge's favorites. His father got the Chinese takeout, and at precisely 7 p.m., the Boones took their places behind their wooden TV trays in the den and prepared to eat. Mr. Boone blessed the food with a standard thanks be to God, and the meal was on. Judge sat beside Theo's chair, waiting patiently, but also ready to eat. The remote control was in the possession of Miss Spoon. Months earlier, the family had hammered down a truce, then an agreement that rotated the use of the remote each Wednesday. When one person had the remote, there would be no complaining from the other two. After a few bites and a few comments about the great debate, Miss Spoon finally turned on the television and began surfing aimlessly, with no destination in mind. The volume was off. The only sound was Judge scarfing down the crispy beef. If Mr. Boone or Theo had the remote, they would go straight to their favorite TV show, Harry Ments and reruns. But Miss Boone just surfed along, not really interested in anything. She watched a little TV and had always tried to keep Theo away from it. She finally stopped at a show called Strattenberg Today, a badly run news recap of the hot stories in town. If in fact there were any hot stories. Usually there were not. She hit the volume, and suddenly they were looking at the plastic smiling face of their governor. The voiceover from an unseen reporter said Governor Waffler was in town today to announce a new plan to finally build the Red Creek bypass, 8-mile loop around the city that will cost $200 million and has been hotly debated for many years. Governor Waffler was joined by local business leaders and elected officials who have been pushing the bypass. He announced that he had directed his transportation secretary to make the bypass a priority and designate enough money to build it. The camera pulled back for a wide shot of the governor talking into a microphone, while a crowd of serious men in suits stood behind him. I can't believe this, Miss Boone said. What's a bypass? Theo asked. She said, well, in this case, it's a road to nowhere that will cost at least $200 million and allow truckers to save about 5 minutes as they travel through Strattenburg. Mr. Boone chimed in. It's also a badly needed 4-lane highway that will reduce the traffic jams on Battle Street. Miss Boone replied, it's also a boondoggle. 5 years ago, a conservative taxpayers group, someone from your side of the street, Woods labeled it the third biggest waste of taxpayer money in the entire country. Mr. Boone replied, and a Chamber of Commerce study found that the Battle Street congestion is so bad it's choking off growth and development. Miss Boone said $200 million for 5 minutes. Unbelievable. Miss Boone said, you can't stand in the way of progress. There was a heavy pause, and Theo managed to say, sorry I asked. They listened to the governor for a moment and ate in silence. Then the local state senator took the podium and began bragging about all the wonderful ways the new bypass would make life better in the city and county. It was not very impressive. Short, red faced, chubby, sort of stuffed into a bad suit. After he thundered on for a few minutes, Miss Boone said, you voted for that clown. Mr. Boone looked guilty and could not deny the accusation. Did you, Dad? Theo asked, almost in disbelief, as if he wanted to say, how could anyone vote for a guy like this? I did, his father finally admitted. At the age of 13, Theo Boone had only a passing interest in politics. Much of what he saw on television told him to stay away from it altogether. He knew his mother tended to be more liberal and his father more conservative, but he had heard them insist more on than once a day they were simply moderates, or somewhere in the middle. After listening to some of their discussions, he had realized there was nothing simple about being a moderate. Thankfully, his parents had a good sense not to argue politics in front of Theo. They rarely argued about anything, at least not in his presence. Innocently, Theo asked, where does the $200 million come from? His father replied, mainly from the state, but there's some city and county money involved too. Theo asked, but if the city is cutting budgets right now, right and left, and canceling classes and laying off policemen and janitors. How can the city spend money on this bypass? His mother was laughed and said, Bingo. The vast majority is state money, Mr. Boone said. But I thought the state was cutting budgets too. Bingo, his mother said again with another laugh. Why do you keep saying bingo, Mom? Theo asked. Because, Theo, you're asking all the right questions, and there are no good answers. The bypass would be a waste of money in good times or bad. Doesn't matter. But to build it now when the city, county, and state are all out of money is ridiculous. Being lawyers, neither parent was in the habit of backing down when discussing an issue. However, Theo got the impression his father's support of the bypass was not quite as strong as his mother's position. There was another lull in the conversation. Then, with perfect timing, a spokesman for the Sierra Club appeared on screen. Miss Boone, firmly and proudly in control of the remote, turned up the volume. The man said, This bypass was a rotten idea 10 years ago, and it's even worse idea now. It crosses Red Creek in two places and will harm the quality of the city's water. It will be built very close to Jackson Elementary School. There'll be 25,000 vehicles a day, many of them big trucks, running right by a playground where 400 kids are playing. Think of the noise and pollution. Miss Boone increased the volume even more. The man from the Sierra Club went on. The environmental impact has not been carefully studied. This project is being rammed through by the politicians who get paid off by the trucking companies. Next was another politician, and Miss Boone quickly muted the television. What's the Sierra Club? Theo asked. A bunch of radical tree huggers, his father said. It's one of the greatest environmental groups in the world, his mother said. Okay, Theo said, and took a bite. Like most kids, Theo actually enjoyed these rare moments when his parents disagreed. He decided to keep the debate going. I'm confused, he said. If the state and city are broke, then where does the $200 million come from? Ask your father, the spoon said quickly, punting the ball across the den with incredible speed and accuracy. They borrow it, Mr. Boone said. Being broke never stopped the government from spending more money. If they can't find money, they simply borrow what they want by floating bonds. Floating bonds? Theo asked. Now you've stepped into deep water, Miss Boone said with another laugh. Yes, it's pretty complicated, Mr. Boone said. Let's save it for another day. The important thing to understand, Theo, is that governments do not operate the way they should. Your mom and I work hard. We represent our clients. We earn fees. We spend money on salaries, office equipment, electric bills, things like that. But we cannot spend more than we earn. It's that simple. Most businesses do this, or at least they try to. Not so with governments. They all spend too much and borrow too much and waste too much. Don't they have to pay back the money they borrow? Theo asked. In theory, yes, but it seems like they just keep putting it off in the next generation. Our generation has basically bankrupted the country, and your generation gets to pay for it. Gee, thanks. Don't mention it. Mr. Boone stuffed half an egg roll into his mouth so he could be required to chew for a long time and not be able to talk. Thankfully, the governor was gone, and for the next story was about to a professor at Stratton College who was upset at the low wages being paid to the janitors on campus. He had organized a protest in front of the administration building, but his crowd appeared to be nothing more than a bunch of janitors. The professor had long gray hair, earrings, and spoke in a shrill voice. Wild Willie Weber, Mr. Boone said. What a clown. Who's he? Theo asked. One of our better local acts. He teaches Russian history at the college and thinks he's a communist, always stirring up trouble or trying to anyway. Of course, Miss Boone was not about to agree. She said he's actually a very effective activist for a number of causes. What's an activist? Theo asked. He refused to allow a new word to fly by without a definition. Miss Boone thought for a second and then said, Activist is a person who has strong feelings about an issue or issues and is willing to get involved to bring about change. Woods? Woods nodded and said, Yep, that's close enough. I would add that an activist is usually active on several fronts. The same characters keep popping up over and over. I suppose, she said. Judge had an eye on one of Mr. Boone's egg rolls, one of the two remaining ones, but he knew his chances were slim. Instead, he went to the kitchen for a drink of water, then returned to the den where he situated himself directly in front of Mr. Boone and stared at the egg rolls. Get out of the way, Judge, Mr. Boone said. Dad, he loves egg rolls, Theo said. So do I, and I'm not in the mood to share. He shouldn't be eating Chinese, Miss Boone said. It was something she said at virtually every meal when Theo started dropping food down to Judge. Both Mr. and Miss Boone thought it was unwise to feed a dog off the table, and they'd said so often. But even while they were telling Theo not to feed Judge, they knew exactly what he was doing. Mr. Boone himself was known to drop a scrap or two, and if Miss Boone saw it, she would always say, Woods, don't feed the dog. But Woods would feed the dog whenever he wanted to, and the next day he would say to Theo, Theo, don't feed the dog. Strange behavior. Theo was often baffled by the things his parents said and did. For example, every night around 9 p.m., when his parents were reading or talking or puttering in the kitchen, Miss Boone would say, Woods, it's your turn to make the coffee. Every night after dinner, Mr. Boone ground the coffee beans, poured the water, adjusted the dial on the automatic brewer, and got everything ready for the first pot that was automatically brewed at 6 o'clock each morning. The couple enjoyed waking up into the smell of freshly brewed coffee, though Miss Boone actually drank very little. Mr. Boone craved the caffeine, and for this reason, he was quite happy to go about his little nightly ritual of making coffee. It was his job, one if he wouldn't share with anyone. The beans had to be properly measured, the water had to be at a certain level, the filter had to be a certain type, and so on. Nevertheless, every night Miss Boone felt the need to remind her husband, and his response is always, "Yes, dear, I'll get to it in a minute." Miss Boone refused to take out the garbage. That chore belonged to Mr. Boone, or more often, Theo. It was no big deal, and Theo didn't mind at all. But for some reason, and out of habit, that Theo was sure neither of his parents could ever explain, about twice a week he heard his father ask, Honey, have you ever taken out the garbage? To which Miss Boone responded every time, No, I just painted my fingernails. Theo had little interest in his mother's fingernails, how often she painted them, but he was almost certain she got them worked on at a salon every Friday morning. They always looked nice, as far as Theo noticed. Why did his parents do these odd things? Theo rarely withheld questions, but he had a hunch that some questions were better off left unasked. Perhaps some questions could not be answered. He also suspected married people settled into routines and did things so often they didn't even realize they were doing them. As he was pondering these things, his mother asked Theo, Did you finish your homework? Again, Theo could count on his question at least twice every night, usually once from his mother and once from his father. They required him to finish his homework each afternoon at the office before he left for home. Theo was a good student, and you could usually knock out his homework in 60 to 90 minutes, and any leftovers could be cleaned up during study hall and the following day. Yes, ma'am, he said, all done. When's the next debate? She asked. I'm not sure. I'm not going to miss it, Theo, I promise. You want to watch today's debate? I have it on a CD. Miss Spoon smiled and dropped her chopsticks. Excellent, Theo. Pop it in. Great idea, said Mr. Boone, anxious to get away from the bypass issue. Theo removed the CD from his backpack, inserted it into player. For the next hour, they watched Theo, Joey, and Aaron battle the team from Central and debate the pros and cons of allowing the children of undocumented workers to attend the public colleges of the state. Miss Boone could not stop smiling. His parents were so proud. Theo had to admit it was a good performance. Even Judge was glued to the screen, unable to figure out how Theo could be in two places at the same time. That's the end of chapter 4.